The last thing I heard before the terminal doors slid shut behind me was my stepfather laughing. Not a nervous laugh. Not an okay joke's over kind of laugh. A real one. The kind that comes from your belly. The kind that means you're genuinely entertained. And underneath it, my half-sister's voice, $20 says she calls crying before we hit the highway. I stood there with my carry-on in one hand and my boarding pass in the other, watching their rental car pull away from the departures curb at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. It was 9:47 p.m. My flight back to Portland boarded in 45 minutes, except I didn't have my passport, my stepfather had it. Let me back up, because the way this story starts makes it sound like a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. My name is Renee. Well, that's what most people call me, short for something fancier that my mother picked out before she decided fancy wasn't really her style. I'm 31 years old. I work as a dental hygienist in Portland, Oregon, where I've lived for the past 6 years, far enough from my family in Houston that holidays require flights and rental cars and the particular kind of emotional preparation that therapists charge a lot of money to help you build. My mother remarried when I was 12. His name is my stepfather, and from the first day he moved into our house, he made it clear that he found me mildly amusing at best and a minor inconvenience at worst. He never hit me. He never screamed at me. He did something quieter and harder to explain. He treated me like a guest who had overstayed her welcome in her own home. Polite enough when my mother was watching. Dismissive the second she wasn't. My half-sister is 7 years younger than me. She's my mother's daughter with him, which means she grew up in a house where his jokes landed, and mine didn't. She learned early that laughing at me was a way to earn his approval. And she never really stopped. My mother loves me. I want to say that clearly, because this story could make it sound like she doesn't. She loves me the way some people love things they're not quite sure how to hold, carefully, from a slight distance, always a little worried about dropping it. When my stepfather makes a joke at my expense, she laughs 2 seconds after he does, which is just long enough to feel like a choice. The trip to Dallas was for my cousin's wedding. One of those big family weekends where everyone converges from different cities and pretends for 72 hours that we're closer than we actually are. My stepfather drove us from Houston on Friday. The plan was that I'd fly home Sunday night, and they'd drive back Monday morning. He offered to hold my passport. This is the part I've turned over in my head more times than I can count. He offered. He said his jacket had an inside pocket, very secure. He'd done this for the whole family for years. It was just easier, and I said yes. Because I was tired from the rehearsal dinner. Because it seemed like a reasonable thing. Because I still had the instinct, even at 31 years old, to accept the occasional small gesture from him, and tell myself it meant something. What I didn't know was that he'd been planning this for 2 weeks. I found that out later. At the time, standing outside the terminal with my completely useless boarding pass, all I knew was that my phone was at 11% battery, my passport was in a car heading toward the I-35 south on-ramp, and the Delta customer service line had a 40-minute estimated wait time. The automatic doors slid open. A family with a stroller came out. I stepped to the side to let them pass, and then I just stood there on the sidewalk, because I genuinely didn't know what else to do. I should tell you something about myself. I am not a person who falls apart easily. I've been paying my own rent since I was 22. I once drove through a snowstorm in the Cascades alone, because I'd already paid for the Airbnb, and I didn't want to lose the money. I'm the person my friends call when something goes wrong because I'm usually calm and I usually have a plan. But there's something about being stranded in an airport at night in a city that isn't yours, by people who are supposed to love you, that bypasses all of that. It doesn't go to the part of your brain that solves problems. It goes somewhere older and quieter, and it just sits there. I called my mother first. She picked up on the third ring. I could hear the car in the background, could hear him in the passenger seat, could hear my sister's voice saying something I couldn't make out. "Hey honey, did you make it through security okay?" She sounded completely normal, like she didn't know. "Mom." I kept my voice very level. "He has my passport." A pause. "What?" "My passport is in his jacket pocket. They just left. I can't board without it." Another pause, longer this time. Then I heard her put her hand over the phone and say something. And then I heard him laugh again, the same laugh as before, and my sister's voice pitched up into a giggle, and I understood. She knew. She'd known the whole time. "Rennie, sweetie, I'm sure we can figure this out. Are you coming back? We're already on the highway, honey. And you know how your stepdad's back has been, he really can't. Are you coming back to give me my passport?" The pause this time was so long I thought the call had dropped. "We thought it would be funny," she said quietly. "Just a little prank. You can call the airline. They have provisions for this kind of thing. I hung up, my phone hit 9%. The thing about being pranked is that the word makes it sound small. A prank is a whoopee cushion. A prank is saran wrap over the toilet. A prank is not leaving your adult daughters stranded in an unfamiliar airport at night, with a dead phone battery and no identification. In a post-2001 world where you genuinely cannot board a domestic flight without a valid ID, let alone an international one. I had my wallet, I had my credit card, I had my carry-on with 2 days' worth of clothes and a toiletry bag. What I didn't have was any form of photo identification, because my driver's license was in Portland. I'd been traveling internationally, so I only brought my passport, and my passport was speeding away down I-35 south with my family, who were apparently placing bets on how long it would take me to cry. I walked back inside the terminal and found an outlet near gate C14 and plugged in my phone. I sat down on the floor next to a man in a suit who didn't look up from his laptop. The fluorescent lights were doing that thing they do late at night in airports, where they feel slightly too bright for the emptiness around them. I had maybe an hour before my flight boarded and left without me. I called Delta. 42 minutes on hold. When the agent finally picked up, she was kind but clear. Without valid government-issued ID, I could not board. She could rebook me on the next available flight to Portland, which was Tuesday morning, 2 days away. There would be a change fee. She could waive it given the circumstances, but she'd need me to speak to a supervisor, and the supervisor wasn't available until morning. I asked if there was anything else she could do. She said she was sorry. I thanked her and sat there for a moment with the phone against my ear, even after she'd hung up, because I wasn't quite ready to be done with a voice that had been kind to me. I'm going to be honest about what happened in the next 20 minutes, because I think it's important, I cried. Not the dramatic, gasping kind. The quiet kind, where your eyes just overflow and you don't really make a sound, and you sit very still because moving somehow makes it worse. The man in the suit glanced over once, and then looked away, which I was grateful for. I thought about everything I'd done to keep the peace over the years. The Christmases I'd flown in for, sitting across from my stepfather at the dinner table, and laughing at his jokes because it was easier. The time he'd called me too sensitive, in front of a room full of relatives, and I'd smiled and said he was probably right. The way I'd kept showing up, year after year, telling myself that family was family, that things would eventually smooth out, that my mother needed me there. I thought about my sister placing a $20 bet on me crying, and then I stopped crying. Not because I felt better, but because I made a decision. I was not calling them back. I was not begging for my passport. I was not giving them the satisfaction of the phone call my sister had predicted. I was going to figure this out myself. The Delta Sky Club was closed to me without a membership, but the departures hall had a Marriott hotel, connected directly to the terminal via a sky bridge. And at the front desk, a woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and an expression of genuine concern listened to my entire story without interrupting me once. Her name tag said her name, and I'll call her by what she was to me that night. The first person who treated me like I mattered. She couldn't give me a free room. She was clear about that, apologetic but clear. But she could give me the employee rate, which dropped the room from $289 to $147, and she pulled up the hotel's business center on her computer and printed me a list of things I'd need to do. Contact TSA about their identity verification process for domestic travelers. Contact the State Department's emergency passport line for expedited documentation. Contact my bank about a wire transfer of additional funds if needed. She handed me the printed list and a bottle of water from behind the counter that she said was complimentary for all guests, technically, and she winked at me in a way that made me feel seen. "You're going to be okay," she said. "Tonight is going to be hard. Tomorrow is going to be better." I believed her. I don't entirely know why, but I did. The room was a standard double. Clean, quiet, the particular silence of a room that has hosted hundreds of strangers and absorbed all of their nights without comment. I sat on the edge of the bed and laid out what I had. Credit card, phone at 43% now from the outlet charge, carry-on, the printed list, and a plan that was shaky but existed. I called my best friend in Portland. She answered on the first ring, which is one of the reasons she's been my best friend for 11 years. I told her everything. She said, "Are you kidding me?" 7 times in a row, each one slightly louder than the last, and then she said, "Okay, what do you need?" And I told her. She looked up the TSA process while I was on the phone with her. It's called identity verification, and it means that if you don't have ID, TSA agents can run an identity check using your personal information, name, date of birth, address. It takes longer, and you have to arrive early, and it's not guaranteed, but it's an option for domestic flights. My Tuesday flight was domestic. Portland to anywhere connects domestically. The State Department emergency line was for international travel, which I no longer needed if I could catch a domestic flight. I just needed to get home. I called Delta back. Different agent this time, a man with a slow, measured voice that I found enormously calming. He explained that the Tuesday morning flight had availability, that the change fee would be waived due to my documented circumstances, and that he was noting my reservation for the early morning check-in, so that TSA would be aware I'd be going through the identity verification process. "Is there anything else I can do for you tonight?" he asked, at the end. I almost laughed. It was such a simple question. Is there anything else I can do for you tonight? I couldn't remember the last time someone in my family had asked me that. "No," I said. "Thank you. You've been really helpful." I didn't sleep much. That's not unusual for me in hotels, but that night it was more than just the unfamiliar pillow. I kept thinking about the moment on the curb, replaying it. My stepfather's laugh, the car pulling away. The way my mother had said, "We thought it would be funny." I'd spent so many years parsing my stepfather's behavior, trying to understand it, trying to account for it, that I'd never quite let myself look directly at my mother's role. It was easier to see her as passive, caught in the middle. Someone who loved me but was limited, who went along with things she didn't fully endorse, because the alternative was conflict and she was conflict-averse. But we thought it would be funny is not something a conflict-averse bystander says. That's someone who was in the room when the plan was made. That's someone who knew 2 weeks in advance, who watched me hand over my passport, who hugged me goodbye at the terminal door and said, "Text me when you land." I thought about that hug for a long time in the dark. I thought about my sister's $20 bet. I thought about all the moments I'd excused and minimized and explained away, all the ways I'd contorted myself to make room for people who had never once contorted themselves for me. And somewhere around 3 a.m., something shifted, not in a dramatic, lightning bolt way. More like a door that had been stuck for a long time finally loosening on its hinges. The kind of shift where you don't make a big decision. You just realize the decision has already been made, quietly, without you noticing, because some part of you had been working on it for years. I wasn't going home to eventually call them. I wasn't going to send a careful text in a few days once the dust had settled. I wasn't going to show up at Christmas and sit across from my stepfather and laugh at his jokes. I was done. Monday passed in the particular slow-motion way that days in airports do. I ate breakfast at a place near my gate that had decent coffee and a turkey sandwich that I didn't taste. I walked the terminal twice, end to end, because I needed to move and there was nowhere to go. I called my dentist office to let them know I'd be out Tuesday instead of Monday. And my office manager asked no questions because she is a sensible person who has learned not to. My phone kept lighting up with messages. My stepfather sent one that said, "Come on, Renee. It was just a joke. Don't be dramatic." My sister sent one that said, "We didn't think you'd be this upset." My mother sent 3, each more plaintive than the last, ending with, "I hope you know that everything I do comes from love." I read all of them. I didn't respond to any of them. Around 2 in the afternoon, I was sitting near a window watching planes taxi out to the run when a woman sat down 2 seats away from me, with a toddler on her lap, and a look on her face that I recognized immediately as the look of a person who has been traveling too long and is holding it together through sheer willpower. We didn't talk right away. We just sat there, the 2 of us, watching the planes. The toddler pointed at each one and made a noise of pure delight, and somehow that small, uncomplicated joy was the most comforting thing I'd seen in 2 days. Eventually she glanced over. "Delayed? Stranded," I said. "Long story." She smiled, the way people smile when they don't want to pry, but they also genuinely want to know. So I told her the short version. By the end of it, her expression had traveled through surprise and sympathy, and landed somewhere in the vicinity of quiet outrage. "What did you do?" she asked. "Got a hotel room. Rebooked." She said it like she meant it. "You don't owe them." Phone call. I hadn't told her I hadn't called them back. She just assumed. "No," I said. "I don't." Tuesday morning, I arrived at DFW 3 hours before my flight. I went straight to the TSA line and found a supervisor and explained my situation. He was professional and thorough. He asked me for my full name, date of birth, current address, social security number. He ran the verification. It took 22 minutes, and then he stamped something and told me I was cleared to proceed. I walked through security with nothing in my hands but my carry-on and my boarding pass. On the other side, I found a coffee kiosk and bought the largest size they had, and stood there drinking it, and watching people rush past on their way to their gates. And I thought, I did this. No one helped me get here. I figured it out step by step in an airport where I didn't know anyone, with a dying phone and no ID and a family who'd bet money on me falling apart. I hadn't fallen apart. My flight landed in Portland at 11:15 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, gray and drizzling the way Portland always is in October, and I have never been so relieved to see gray drizzle in my life. My best friend picked me up from the airport, because she is exactly the kind of person who shows up at the airport without being asked. She had a coffee for me in the cup holder, and an entire speech prepared about my family, which she delivered at full volume for most of the drive home. I laughed for the first time since Friday. Here's what happened in the weeks after I got home. My stepfather texted twice more, both in the same register, dismissive, slightly annoyed that I was still upset, with the word sensitive appearing in both messages. My mother called 4 times. I let them go to voicemail and listened to them later when I was ready. In the last one, she was crying, and she said she hadn't understood how far things had gone wrong between us, and she was sorry. I believe she meant it. I also know that meaning something and doing something about it are different things, and that I had spent my entire adult life accepting the first as a substitute for the second. I texted my mother back once. I told her I needed space, that I was okay, and that I would reach out when I was ready. I haven't blocked her. I'm not sure what comes next between us. That part of the story is still being written. I didn't text my stepfather back. I didn't text my sister back. They never asked if I was okay. Not once, not in any of those messages, did anyone ask if I was safe, if I'd found a place to stay, if I'd managed to get home. Every single message was about their feelings, their surprise at my reaction, their desire for things to go back to the way they were. When I noticed that, something clicked into place. Not in an angry way. More in the way of finally seeing clearly after years of slightly blurry vision. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the consequences. There's a thing that happens when you grow up in a family that treats you like a punchline. You learn to be a little suspicious of your own perceptions. You start to think, maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe if I just had a thicker skin, if I could just take a joke, things would be easier. You carry that around for a long time. You carry it into friendships and relationships, and all the quiet moments where you're deciding how much space you're allowed to take up. And you keep making yourself a little smaller, and a little smaller, until one day you're standing on a curb outside an airport terminal watching the only family you have drive away, and you realize they're laughing and you think, no, not anymore. That's the moment I keep coming back to. Not the anger, not the logistics, not the 2 days alone in a Dallas airport. The moment where something that had been building for years finally had enough weight to tip. I've been in therapy since I was 26, so I'm not going to tell you this was some kind of sudden transformation. It wasn't. It was more like the last piece of something clicking into alignment. Like I'd been carrying a picture around for years, and finally found the right light to see it clearly. The picture was this. I had a family that loved me as an audience more than they loved me as a person. And I had been so hungry for the love that I'd accepted the audience part as a substitute. I'm not hungry for that anymore. It's been 4 months since that night in Dallas. I spent Thanksgiving in Portland with my best friend and 3 of her cousins and a man she's been dating who made a brisket that was genuinely the best thing I've ever eaten. I did not fly to Houston. I did not send a card. I got a new passport. It came in the mail on a Wednesday, and I stood at my kitchen counter and held it for a minute. This small blue booklet that represents the uncomplicated right to go wherever I want to go, and I thought about how I handed the last one over to someone who used it as a prop in a joke. I will not be doing that again. Not the passport thing specifically, though also that, but the larger thing it was part of. The pattern of handing over things that belonged to me. My security, my comfort, my sense of what was normal and acceptable to people who weren't careful with them. My stepfather texted me once more, about 6 weeks ago. It said, "Hope you're doing well. Let us know if you ever want to talk." I read it twice. I put my phone down. I made a cup of tea. I did not respond. Some people think that silence is the same as giving up. I used to think that too. Now I understand that sometimes silence is the most complete answer you can give. It says, I have nothing left to prove to you. I don't need the last word. I've already moved on, and the only thing left is for you to understand that. I don't know if they understand it. Honestly, that's not something I spend much time thinking about anymore. I'm too busy building the life I want, slowly, deliberately, in a city I chose for myself with people who actually show up. That's not nothing. That's everything, actually. I just needed one terrible night in an airport to finally see it.